There are clues that never stay silent. They just wait for the right person to listen. File Room 23 is located deep in the basement of an old police department building. No one can remember exactly when someone last entered here. The smell of rotting, moldy paper from dusty file boxes has become part of the air, so quiet that you can hear the ticking of the clocks secondhand on the cracked wall. Among the shelves of documents that are about to collapse, there's a transparent plastic box. The label has faded to the point where only 3 words can be read: unprocessed evidence. Inside is a sealed plastic bag, and inside that bag is a strand of hair. Alone, silent, forgotten. If you find this video interesting, don't forget to like to support, share for your friends to explore, and subscribe to Tootie Mystery so you don't miss any mysteries that are about to be revealed. No one expected that this strand of hair, once forgotten in a case that seemed to have ended 30 years ago, would be the key to unlocking the door to the truth. A truth that has been deliberately buried or simply forgotten amid countless other cases. Open file folder cases that never really end. There's a term that veteran investigators often mention with reluctance: cold case. Cold cases, a fancy name for dusty files, unfinished stories, and victims who never get justice. But in reality, not all cases are cold. Some are just waiting to be awakened. And in most of them, the evidence was always there. A bloodstain on the wall, a cigarette with lip marks, that aforementioned hair. The only thing missing? Someone who knows how to listen to them. DNA, the silent witness of time. DNA does not lie. It is not vague like testimony. It is not amnesiac like witnesses. It is not corrupted like records. In every cell of a person, DNA carries history, identity, life, and guilt. But why was such solid evidence once ignored? The reason could be inadequate technology. It could also be laziness, lack of budget, or even someone deliberately did not want it to be solved. There have been cases where the suspect lived his whole life in freedom, while the innocent sat behind bars for decades. All because of a piece of DNA lying dormant in a test tube, never brought to light. Candle, when the darkness disappears, the souls return. Many years later, a young investigator, curious, determined, not accepting the answer impossible, entered the old archive. Not to find a specific murderer, but to hear the call from unfinished cases. As people began to review each piece of evidence, each old DNA sample, a strange thing happened. The pieces began to fit together as if time had never been able to make them disappear. Some files revealed shocking wrongful convictions. There is a case that made a man who was once respected by society revealed as a serial killer. There is a case where the last victim was named, after 40 years, only remembered as Jane Doe, the anonymous person. How many more cases are still sleeping in the dark? How many families still live in torment because of a fateful night that has never been explained? And if DNA could tell a story, are we ready to hear it? When you look at a drop of old blood, you might think it is just a trace of violence. But to another eye, a drop of blood can be the victim's final declaration, a whisper from the past. I'm still here, and I still want justice. All it takes is a DNA sample, a chance to be tested, an unquenchable curiosity, and the truth will find its way to the light. The hidden power of DNA, the language of truth. There are truths that cannot be heard with the ears, cannot be seen with the eyes. They are written in the genetic code, and only those who can decode them can understand them. Before the age of DNA, when intuition and testimony were everything. Back in the 1980s, criminal investigations still largely relied on witnesses, confessions, and the intuition of investigators. Police often had to read the scene by feeling, vague footprints, and sometimes risky deductions. It was not uncommon for a case to be solved only by a confession, which later turned out to be forced or false. In that darkness, DNA was still there, silently, unquestioned. 1986, the Silent Revolution. In 1986, England witnessed a strange case in the town of Narborough. 2 girls were murdered 3 years apart. The police arrested a suspect after he confessed. But then, a very new test at the time, DNA testing, came back with the result. The suspect was innocent. The real murderer? A man named Colin Pitchfork, exposed after more than 5,000 men in the area were subjected to mass DNA testing. For the first time in history, an innocent man was exonerated by DNA, and a murderer was caught without any witnesses. Just his biological traces. Who is DNA? It is memory. It is a court. It is an immortal witness. DNA does not age, cannot be bribed, does not forget. In a small blood stain, a skin cell, a strand of hair, there's a map. The map tells where you've been, who touched you, even the descendants you've never met. It doesn't need you to tell the story. It is the story. But the magic didn't come easily. DNA was once a scientific mystery, dissected in a lab, slow and inaccessible. Samples took weeks or months to decipher, and not everyone believed in this invisible writing. The 1990s, when DNA began to talk. From the mid-1990s, high-profile cases began to be re-examined using DNA. Wrongfully convicted people began to be exonerated. Murderers thought to have escaped were exposed decades later. Unknown victims were finally named after decades of lying in cemeteries under the words Jane Doe. And little by little, the world of crime shifted. From intuition to science, from guesswork to genetic proof. But that power isn't always used properly. While DNA may be powerful, it's still just a tool. And tools can be forgotten, misused, or even abused. Evidence has been left in a lab's refrigerator for 30 years. Some labs lack the budget or the chemicals to process the sample. Some investigators choose to ignore the sample because they don't trust the technology or because they already have a good killer. DNA can't speak for itself. It needs humans to listen. And sometimes we don't listen. Genomics, when science goes beyond traditional forensics. Today, with the explosion of gene mapping, AI-assisted investigations, and genealogy databases, just a small element, DNA, can identify a single individual in millions. We've seen it. The Golden State Killer case was solved thanks to genetics from relatives. Cases from 1969 solved by analyzing DNA traces that had never been tested. The question is no longer is there enough evidence, but do we dare to go back and listen to the evidence that has been forgotten? From silence to judgment. DNA is the last living witness. When testimony fades, when records rot, DNA remains. It is a reminder that justice does not always come quickly, but it can come if we keep looking. In every cell of sin, there is a chance for justice to be found. Cold cases, the unseen trace. Some crimes never go away. They lie in wait, hidden in dried blood, a stray hair, or a dusty file. They don't ask for revenge, they just ask to be heard. The concept of a cold case when justice freezes. A cold case is not a forgotten case. It is a wound that has not healed, buried because of lack of evidence, missing witnesses, a killer who is out of reach, or simply no one has the patience to pursue it. There are files marked in red, unsolved, no further leads. There are parents who die without ever knowing what really happened to their children. But time does not destroy DNA. Inside the forgotten file rooms, in the basements of police stations, crime libraries, or evidence storage facilities, there are cold, nameless rooms. These places contain frozen fragments of time, plastic boxes containing bloody clothes, envelopes containing hair, scratched fingernails, plastic bags with the years 1973, 1965, even 1949. The question is, if we go back and open those boxes, will the truth still be in them? Cases thought to be dead, revived by DNA. Pushpin 1. Golden State Killer, the Ghost of California. From 1974 to 1986, an anonymous man committed at least 13 murders, more than 50 rapes, and more than 100 robberies. He was like a ghost, invisible, intelligent, disappearing after each crime. For 40 years, investigators called him many names: East Area Rapist, Original Night Stalker. But no one knew who he was. It wasn't until 2018, when DNA from the crime scene was linked through genetic genealogy, that Joseph James D'Angelo, a former police officer, was arrested. DNA from a distant relative was used to trace his identity. DNA, a small clue from a later generation, reawakened a case from the previous century. Pushpin 2. The Buckskin Girl. When a victim finally had a name. In 1981, a young girl was found dead in Ohio, wearing a buckskin coat. She had no identification, and no one reported her missing. For nearly 40 years, she was simply called the Buckskin Girl. In 2018, DNA from her hair was analyzed using new techniques. Through genetic databases and family trees, she was identified as Marcia King, a missing Arkansas teenager. Her family finally knew the truth. DNA doesn't just catch the killer. It gives names back to the forgotten. Pushpin 3. Alaska murder. One hair, one verdict. In 1993, a woman was raped and murdered in Fairbanks, Alaska. The case hit a dead end. In 2019, an analyst decided to retest a preserved hair, which was considered substandard at the time. New technology not only decoded the gene, but also led directly to the suspect, a person who lived just blocks away. DNA death speaks in blood. Justice speaks in DNA. When genetic data becomes the key to unlocking the vault of memories. Today, with just a sliver of DNA from a criminal and a distant relative who has tested at 23andMe or Ancestry.com, the system can build a family tree, narrowing down a suspect from millions to a single individual. We live in an age where a criminal may be caught not because he left behind an identity, but because his cousin tested his DNA out of curiosity. But DNA doesn't seek justice. As powerful as it is, DNA is still raw data. It requires people to be brave enough to look back, to open up the past, even if it hurts. Some investigators have to fight for years to regain access to old samples. Some families have to hire independent researchers to find DNA from the victim's clothing. And some truths remain undiscovered, simply because no one checked that broken fingernail in that file box. The clues are not dead. They are waiting to be named. In the darkness of cold cases, DNA does not sleep. It lies there, motionless but alive. And when the first person dares to open that box, the truth will awaken. Evidence boxes, the secrets behind the clear nylon. Not all evidence is forgotten. Some is buried. Some lies in discreet nylon boxes, silent, waiting for the time when it can speak the truth. The boxes that no one wants to open. In the darkness of police basements, the boxes, often small, with old numbers, are like a criminal's Pandora's box. They contain bloodstains, torn cloth, broken nails, a torn letter, or simply a piece of dry skin. They are labeled, pending analysis. Do not tamper, evidence sealed. Or worse, no known suspect. No further testing recommended. But these inanimate objects, in the light of modern science, can scream with the voice of justice. Why is evidence left behind? Pushpin 1. Insufficient technology. In 1970, you could find type A blood at a crime scene, but you couldn't tell who among millions of people had the same blood type. With hair, if there's no hair root, then there's no DNA. But in the 2000s, with PCR, polymerase chain reaction, LC DNA, low copy number DNA, YSDR, analysts could separate individual DNA molecule from a cell that died decades ago. The problem isn't that the evidence doesn't exist. It's that the era isn't ready to hear it. Pushpin 2. Storage errors and forgotten bodies. Some evidence is lost when the storage room moves. Some blood samples are damaged by heat. Some evidence is even thrown away because after conviction, people think it's no longer necessary to keep it. And there are the unnamed victims, so their evidence is also undervalued. Boxes of evidence are sometimes not part of the system. They're under desks, in personal cabinets, or buried in office papers. They need to be found again to have a chance to tell the story. The silent specimens come back to life. File folder case 1. The bloody sweater from 1982. A rape case in Texas had been considered unsolved for 30 years. The only specimen was the victim's sweater, stained with blood and semen. But in 1982, there were no tools to identify DNA, and the case was closed. In 2015, a new investigator decided to send the sweater back to a modern forensic lab. The result, the DNA matched a previous offender in another state, now in prison for a similar crime. File folder case 2, torn letter, voice from the dead. An unusual suicide in 1996. The man was said to have shot himself. No one suspected, until his daughter found a handwritten note, torn with the lines. He said, "If I told anyone." The police reopened the case, extracted fingerprints and DNA from the torn letter. The result, a strange trace, not belonging to the victim, matched a person who had committed domestic violence. The letter was forgotten for 20 years, turned out to be the victim's last words. When technology turns back time, with tools like next-generation sequencing, NGS, mitochondrial DNA, touch DNA, environmental DNA, scientists can trace DNA on bullet casings, ropes, even dust particles. That turns every old box of evidence into a potential gold mine. Just one retest, and history can change. The talking boxes that change the law. In many states in the U.S., cases after DNA re-examination have forced the legal system to change, prohibiting premature destruction of evidence, allowing retesting even after a verdict has been announced, expanding the budget for cold case DNA re-examination programs. In Vietnam, although not yet popular, there have been proposals to build a criminal DNA bank and re-examine forgotten samples. Are you ready to open that box? A piece of cloth, a piece of paper, a drop of dried blood. They line the box, sealed by time, but not buried by the truth. Because when science speaks, no past is truly over. The silence of justice when DNA is not heard. In a courtroom, truth is the foundation of justice. But what happens when truth is forgotten? When DNA, the invisible voice of victim and perpetrator, is ignored, and a verdict is built on false memories, incomplete testimony, or prejudice. Silence, an invisible form of violence. There is nothing more terrifying than an innocent person walking into a prison cell for decades, not because he committed a crime, but because a DNA sample was never tested or no one cared. And in that silence, justice sleeps. DNA, the only thing that can speak, is locked away in a test tube in a filing cabinet that no one opens. Forgotten truths. Those who were wrongfully convicted. File folder case 1, Ricky Jackson, 39 years in prison for a false testimony. Cleveland, Ohio, 1975. A 12-year-old boy testified that Ricky Jackson and his 2 brothers had killed a man. No DNA, no fingerprints, no weapon found, just one confession. And it was enough to convict 3 men for nearly 40 years. In 2011, the only witness admitted to lying, under pressure from the police. But what was even stranger, no one ever tested the DNA at the scene. When tested, nothing matched Jackson. A life, imprisoned because no one tested a blood sample. File folder case 2, Johnny Lee Gates, sentenced to death for blindfold. In 1976, Johnny Lee Gates, a black man, was accused of raping and murdering a white woman. No witnesses, no solid evidence. The only evidence? A piece of blindfold found on the body. He was sentenced to death. It wasn't until 2015 that his lawyer was allowed to request a DNA test from the blindfold. The result, the DNA did not match Mr. Gates. He spent 43 years in prison for evidence that was never heard. Why wasn't DNA used in time? Man standing 1, prejudice and bias. In many places, skin color, gender, or social background can influence the level of investigation and testing. There are cases where, because the accused is poor or belongs to a vulnerable group, the investigating agency does not request DNA testing, even though it is capable of doing so. Sometimes justice is not forgotten, it is selective. Chart decreasing 2, lack of resources and budget. Forensic laboratories are sometimes overloaded. In some places, DNA is only tested if the case is considered serious or likely to succeed in prosecution. And so the evidence is waited on indefinitely. Warning 3, legal conservatism, not wanting to review the verdict. There are cases where the prosecutors are unwilling to admit mistakes. Requests for DNA retesting are refused. In some places, DNA testing is even resisted, even though the technology is available. Consequences: when the innocent is imprisoned, the criminal is still free. Each wrongful conviction not only destroys the life of the innocent, but also allows the real perpetrator to continue to roam free. For example, in many cases that were exonerated through DNA, when retested, the DNA matched another person who had committed 3 to 4 more crimes while the innocent person was incarcerated. Justice is not just silent, it creates new victims. The light from exoneration projects. Microscope the Innocence Project. Since 1992, this organization has helped more than 300 people be exonerated in the U.S. by retesting DNA from old evidence. Each case is a testament. DNA never lies. Only people are not ready to listen. If you have DNA, why not test? If you don't have it, how dare you convict? A drop of DNA can save a life. True justice doesn't come from a courtroom. It starts in a test tube, from every tiny cell, containing the truth that no one can deny. And if you've ever been lied to by a confession, let your DNA speak again. The return from oblivion, lives that DNA brought back to justice. If justice can sleep, DNA is the wake-up call. And in the cold, dark notes of life, there are people who step out of the darkness, carrying with them a fierce light, the truth. Not a dream, they really come back. In thousands of prison cells around the world, there are people who are not paying for their crimes, but are being punished for the sins of others. And then one day, their names are called, not to go to court, but to return. Not because someone confessed, but because DNA spoke. People pulled out of the darkness. Small Blue Diamond 1. Kirk Bloodsworth, the first death row inmate exonerated by DNA. Baltimore, 1985. A little girl was brutally murdered. The police arrested Kirk, a former Marine, because he matched the description of the witness. Despite no physical evidence, he was sentenced to death. In 1992, Kirk convinced the court to run a DNA test on the victim's semen. The result? No match. He was innocent. The real killer was identified 10 years later, thanks to that DNA. I wasn't a human being for 9 years. DNA didn't just set me free, it gave me my name back. Kirk Bloodsworth. Small Blue Diamond 2. Ronald Cotton. Forgiveness after 11 years of wrongful imprisonment. In 1984, Jennifer, a young woman, was raped. She could only remember her attacker's face for a few seconds. She pointed to Ronald Cotton during the identification. Ronald was sentenced to 2 life sentences. In 1995, thanks to DNA on the victim's clothes, the real killer was identified as Bobby Poole, a man who had bragged in prison that I did it. Ronald was exonerated. The miracle? Jennifer, who was wrong, became Ronald's closest friend after learning the truth. DNA set me free, but it was Jennifer who gave me back my faith in humanity. Small Blue Diamond 3. Richard Phillips, 45 years of injustice. He is the longest imprisoned American who was later proven innocent thanks to DNA and new witnesses. For nearly half a century, he lived behind bars, painting to keep his sanity. When he was released, he had only 2 sets of clothes, and no one was waiting at the gate. A legal organization helped him sue and win more than $1 million in compensation. I don't know how to use a touchscreen phone, but I know how to forgive. DNA, unlocking not only the truth, but also a life. Every double helix carries a memory. Every cell is a witness. DNA doesn't care about testimony, race, or reputation. It can't be bought. It can't be swayed. It's truth in its purest form. And when it's put on the scales of justice, it turns fate upside down. Rebuilding a life when freedom is so strange. Being set free doesn't mean getting back what was lost. They lost youth, family, honor, social skills, faith in the system. Some people lost 10 years. Some lost 45 years. But time wasn't the only thing they lost. It was their innocence of a just world. Artists palette art and healing. Many innocent people who were released turned to painting, music, or writing to heal themselves. Some painted bars in blood, redrawn the faces of those who lied, or simply painted the sky for the first time in decades. Hammer and wrench reintegration, a journey full of barriers. They had no credit records, no jobs, no internet skills. They had to learn to live again in a world that had long since abandoned them. Some had to live in shelters for the wrongly accused. Others became activists, helping those still in the dark to have a voice. They're not victims. They are living witnesses to the power of truth. No one can give them back the time they lost. But the truth, when acknowledged, can transform them from anonymous shadows into living symbols of hope and of justice. DNA doesn't just break chains. It rebuilds people. The real villain, DNA, hunts the shadows. The real name has not been mentioned in the courtroom, but DNA knows who he is. He has never disappeared. He is just hidden in the crowd, living freely with the horror he left behind. When justice is not about forgiveness, but about exposing the real culprit. In many cases, the use of DNA has not only exonerated the wrongly convicted, but also brought the real culprit to light, decades after he thought he had escaped forever. We're not just talking about exonerating, but also unmasking the hidden person. The killer lives among us, and DNA begins the hunt. Small Blue Diamond 1. Dennis Rader, BTK. The ruthless killer unmasked by DNA after 30 years. For nearly 3 decades, he haunted Wichita, Kansas, BTK. Bind, torture, kill. He tormented his victims in a handwritten nightmare, then disappeared into the night. In 2004, BTK returned, sending a floppy disk challenging the police. They tracked him down to the church where he attended. They secretly took a DNA sample from his daughter's underwear left at the hospital, and it matched the semen at the 1974 crime scene. The end. There was no escape. DNA is the voice of the dead, and BTK finally had to listen. Small Blue Diamond 2. Golden State Killer, caught thanks to genetic family tree. A series of rapes and murders from the 1970s. 1980s scattered across California once left the police helpless. They called him the Golden State Killer. A semen sample was stored in cold storage for 40 years. In 2018, thanks to genetic genealogy techniques, comparing DNA with a public family tree on the GEDmatch website, the police found the suspect's distant relatives. From there, they built a family tree, narrowed down, and identified Joseph James D'Angelo, a former police officer, as the culprit. Death does not silence them. The family tree is the testimony. Small Blue Diamond 3. A hair. A rapist in Texas exposed after 40 years. A teenage girl was raped in 1981 in El Paso. No one was arrested. The case was closed. 40 years later, the semen sample was retested using modern technology. A single hair remained. No roots, no cells, but still capable of mitochondrial DNA analysis. It matched the former security guard at the scene, now living peacefully in Florida. He was arrested while gardening, never thinking that a single hair would bring him to justice. DNA, the cold but never forgetful detective. It doesn't need a confession. It doesn't need a memory. It just needs a trace. DNA has no emotion, no bias, but it doesn't forgive. A saliva sample in a discarded cigarette pack. A skin cell on a rope. A frozen semen trace in an evidence vault. Decades passed, technology sped up. Death may be cold, but DNA is always alive. Hunted through time, the shadow of the bad guy can no longer hide. Some became grandfathers. Some became police officers. Some changed their names. But the double helix inside them never changes. Wherever he hides, his genes remain at the scene. When justice is not late, but just slow. Some say it's too late to judge. But with DNA, it's never too late to tell the truth. Some people die before they're caught, but DNA still records their crime, records it for posterity. Punishment isn't always a sentence. Sometimes just having their name mentioned in the right place is enough. DNA series conclusion. Truth in blood, DNA, and the silent revolution of justice. For decades, justice may have fallen asleep, but truth has not. And truth has a scientific, precise, indelible name, DNA. pushpin from the missed clue to the revolution against error. We have gone from cases that seemed closed, to names that came back from oblivion, to murderers who were thought never to be exposed. The key? A drop of blood, a strand of hair, a cell. What was once unthinkable has now become the most reliable advocate in the courtroom. Fire justice without DNA is sometimes just a gamble. How many innocent people have died in prison? How many evil people have lived freely? How much evidence lies in the archives, waiting for the day when science touches it? Milky Way DNA is the ultimate witness. It does not tremble. It does not fear being forced to confess. It does not forget. It is the voice of the dead, of the abandoned, and of the ultimate truth. In a world full of noise, DNA whispers, and those whispers are rewriting the history of justice.